If you are a DevOps engineer and you are going to deploy your applications on Kubernetes cluster in production environment, and if you don't know about Ingress and Ingress Controller, then I can say definitely you are not going to make it 100%. Do you think it is a strong statement? Yes. If you want to know why, watch this video until end, then you will come to know why I made such a strong statement. Before getting into the session, let us know what is the agenda. We are going to see what is Ingress and what is Ingress Controller, what is the role of Ingress and Ingress Controller in Kubernetes cluster, and why we need Ingress Controller, what are the available Ingress controllers. Finally, we look into the hands-on demo, how we can configure Ingress Controller for the application. Hey viewer, if you are new here, hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon to get the regular updates about my future videos. Before knowing what is Ingress and Ingress Controller, let us know why we need them first. For example, you have an application, you have deployed this application on Kubernetes cluster with 3 replicas that are on 2 different worker nodes. 2 pods are running on first worker node and another one is working on second worker node. To make your application accessible publicly, you need to create a service with type as node port. Whenever you create a service for your application, and if you know IP address of one of the worker nodes and port number that is defined as part of service, you can easily access your application from outside. So this kind of service is called as external service. That means you can access your application outside the Kubernetes cluster. So that is the reason it is called as external service. Once the service receives the requests from the multiple clients, it will do the load balancing and forwards the request to the application pods running on different worker nodes. This kind of service is called as an external service. Whenever you define your service with the type as a node port, that service will be created as external service so that the service can be available to the public. So any client who knows the IP address of one of the worker nodes and port number, they can easily access your application from outside world. But it is good for development and testing, and it is not correct for production application because there might be chances that one of your nodes might be crashed or complete Kubernetes cluster might crashed. In that case, the IP address may change and port number also will be changed. And also, you don't want to share worker nodes IP address and port numbers to the clients. So you have to create service as an internal service. To create internal service, you need to define service type as a cluster IP. So it is available only inside the clusters, or other applications in the Kubernetes cluster can only access your service. So it is not public. And also it is not safe to provide access to the service directly to the public for security reasons. To make it service secure, you can create service as an internal service by defining type as a cluster IP so that the service is not accessible outside the Kubernetes cluster. Once you create service as an internal service, then your service is secured. Now your clients cannot access your application using IP address and port number since the service is not accessible outside the Kubernetes cluster. Now the question is how you can provide access to the application for your clients in a secured way. That is where Ingress comes in. In Kubernetes terms, we call it as an Ingress resource. We can create Ingress resource by defining a YAML file, just like as a service. The content of Ingress YAML file looks like as shown in the screen. We define kind as Ingress, and the important part is the specification where we define set of routing rules as host as the domain name. So using this domain name, clients can access the application. Domain name is assigned to the host attribute and service name as a web. This name should match with the service that we have created and service port number. So once you define this set of routing rules, then our Ingress can pass the request to the service, and the service must be defined as a cluster IP as a type. Then it is secure. Even if you define it as a node port, still you can define the ingress and ingress controller on top of your service. So we must secure the service. That's the reason we define service type as a cluster IP. Ingress resource alone cannot do the job. So we need an ingress controller, which is an implementation of ingress resource. Ingress controller is just like a pod which is running one of the worker nodes in the Kubernetes cluster. There are a number of third-party ingress controllers available, so we can use one of. We can define ingress controller as a daemon set or deployment. If you define ingress controller as a daemon set, the ingress controller created on each and every worker node. If there are 5 or 6 worker nodes for your application, ingress controller will be deployed on 6 worker nodes. And if you define ingress controller as a deployment, it can be 1 or 2 or 6. That's the difference. Let us have a look at how Ingress understands the name of the internal service that is already deployed. The service name in the Ingress should match with the internal service name under the metadata. And also the port number should match with the port number that is defined under the ports as 8080. So whenever client accesses the application via hello-world.info, then the request will be forwarded to the service defined under the service name under this path. The domain name for your application may have multiple paths and multiple subdomains. Let us have a look at how we can define multiple paths for your domain. Here you can see we have the domain name hello-world.info that is assigned to the attribute host, and we have 2 paths under the host. For example, Hello World application may have 2 different services, one service for web and another service for mobile. In that case, you want to access helloworld.info/web, then request will be forwarded to the service of the web app. If helloworld.info/mobile, then request will be forwarded to the mobile service. In that way, you can define multiple paths for your domain name. Now we look at how we can define multiple subdomains for your application. In this case, look at the specification. Under the rules, we have defined the host as web.helloworld.info. Under this, we have the path and service defined as a web. And for mobile, mobile.helloworld.info. Then request will be forwarded to the mobile service. So client has to send the request to this particular domain name with web.helloworld.info. Then the request will be forwarded to the web service, and if it is mobile.helloworld.info, then request will be forwarded to the mobile service. So when there are multiple paths, there will be one host and there will be multiple paths under the host. If it is for multiple subdomains, we'll have the multiple hosts, and each host may have one or multiple paths. That's the difference. What Ingress Controller does in Kubernetes? Whenever request received by Ingress Controller, and it will evaluate all the rules and defined in the Ingress resource under the specification, and it will evaluate all the rules and calls to, and Ingress resource forwards the request to the actual service, forward the request to the actual application, so that request will be processed and given the response. So I can say Ingress Controller is an entry point to the Kubernetes cluster. In case of cloud services like Amazon, Google Cloud Provider, and Azure, they have the cloud load balancer. So whenever client sends a request, the request is received by the cloud load balancer, and it will forward the request to the Kubernetes cluster. Then the request will be received by the Ingress Controller. Ingress Controller evaluates all the rules specified in the Ingress resource, and Ingress resource knows to which service the request needs to be forwarded, so that service knows to which application this request can be forwarded and can get response. In this way, Ingress Controller runs in Kubernetes cluster. There are a number of Ingress controllers available in the market: NGINX, Traffic, and Kong. These are the popular ones, and the most popular one is NGINX. We are going to see the demo using NGINX. Usually, whenever you want to deploy Ingress Controller in Kubernetes cluster, you need to define a standard Kubernetes objects like namespace, service account, cluster role, cluster binding role, config map, and secrets, daemon set or deployment. Now, let's get into the demo and make our hands dirty. In this demo, we are going to see how we can deploy Ingress Controller for our sample application, and we'll run the Kubernetes cluster. We'll define the service for our application, and we'll define Ingress resource, and later we'll see how it goes. First of all, we need a Kubernetes cluster in my laptop. So I have a Minikube tool. So Minikube is a tool which can create a Kubernetes cluster on your laptop. So you need to run it. So before that, you need to install the Minikube on your laptop. If you don't know how to install the Minikube on your laptop, I will provide the link in the description. Please check it so that you can install Minikube. Here, we don't want to create Ingress controller and install, because Minikube by default it provides NGINX controller. So we no need to create any Kubernetes objects for our NGINX controller. So it's already deployed. It will be there as an image, and if it is not running, we can enable the Ingress by running a simple command. Let us our Kubernetes cluster get started. Then we'll see whether already Ingress controller is running or not. It shows that enabled on ARAM's dashboard, default storage class Ingress, or Ingress controller that runs under the kube system namespace. Yes, it's running. If it is not running, you need to run another command, that is Minikube add-ons enable Ingress. So this is the command to enable the Ingress Ingress controller so that it will be up and running. So it's already running in my case, so I'm not going to run that command. Now we have to deploy a sample application. I have the command here which will fetch the hello app image from this Google Docker registry, and it will deploy on our Kubernetes cluster. So deployment for this web app is created, and we need to create the service for this application. Now we are going to define the type as a node port. So we are creating it as an external service. Let us see what's the difference between the external service and internal service. Then later we'll change type to cluster port, and what will happen, whether we can access the application from outside or not. We are going to see that now. Let us see whether the service is created. Of course it's created, and we want to know the URL of the worker node where it is running. So this is the URL. Using this URL, you can access the service now. Yes, so you are able to access the service or application from outside the Kubernetes cluster using IP address and port number. Now we want to protect our application from outside world. We don't want to give IP address of our worker node and port number. As we discussed earlier, it's not safe because of security reasons, and also we don't want to remember all these IP address and port numbers. As I said earlier, there might be chances that your worker nodes may crash and you may get different IP address and port number. In that case, we want to have a single domain name, and you can access your application easily without remembering any IP address and port numbers. For that, we have to create the Ingress resource. So how to create Ingress resource? I already have the content that is defined Ingress resource here, that is kind as Ingress, metadata and name as example Ingress, and the host name hello world. This is the domain name. Using this domain name, we are going to access our application. Let us see whether we can access it or not using this domain. So for this, I need to be inside the Ingress folder, cd Ingress, or yeah, once we are here, let us run kubectl apply example ingress.yaml. So our Ingress is created, and we need to do one thing here. We have to change the host file. we have to assign our node IP address, worker node IP address to this particular domain, so that if you hit the helloworld.info domain name from your browser, the request will be forwarded to the specific worker node. So in that way, you are hiding the IP address from the external world. How to do that? So sudo vi etc host. This is where our host definitions are defined. So here, come to end of the file, and what is the node? It is what is the IP address of a worker node? That is paste here. I think I already have it, so I don't need to create, because I tested the application before giving the demo. So I have already defined it here, so you can see I don't need to define it again. Let me make sure that the IP address is the same. Yes, it is the same. So let me check whether I can yes. So Ingress controller is working. Whatever the rules that we have defined in our Ingress resource, that is working fine. And if you see, I'm going to show you one more example, which we don't want, which we are not expecting. Still it is working. So because while creating service, we were exposing it as a node port. The type we define it as a node port. We want to change it to cluster IP so that the service can become internal service and it is not accessible outside the Kubernetes cluster. So what we are going to do now, we are going to delete the existing service, and we recreate by defining the type as cluster IP. And even if you don't define the type as cluster IP, the default type will be the cluster IP, so that it will be created as an internal service. Delete service web. Let me check whether it has been deleted, so you don't see. So we don't have service with name web. Now and change it to cluster IP. Yes, service is created. Now you can check whether you can access it or directly. We should not. Yes. So if you define type as a cluster IP, the service will automatically become as internal service, so that it is not accessible using IP address and port number, but you can access it with domain name. Yes, this is what we are expecting. So in this way, you can leverage the Ingress controller to protect your application from outside world. So instead of providing access directly to your application or service of your application, you can define Ingress rules so that you can forward the request to respective service and you can process the request from your clients. So by creating Ingress controller, you are not only abstracting the IP addresses and port numbers, and also you are providing the security for your application. On top of Ingress controller, even you can define authentication as well. We want to deploy the second version of the application, which is 2.0, and we want to access this application under the different path like hello world info / version 2. So we are going to use HTTP protocol and we want to access this application like this. So how we are going to do that? First, let us deploy this application. Let us create the service. Now create the service for this application, and we are defining the type as a cluster IP so that it is an internal service. It is not accessible to the public. So service for the application web 2 is created. So we want to create the Ingress resource for this. So what we can do that, go to the existing Ingress definition. As we discussed earlier, if you want to define multiple paths under one domain, you can do like this. So in that way, you can access. So under the path, we want to access it as version 2 and make this application service web 2 because that is the service name we have created. That is what we defined in our deployment. Our second service name is web 2. Now we have to deploy this Ingress resource. kubectl apply yeah, that's the problem. Yes, it must be exactly. Now it is perfect, I think. Yes, it is created. Now if you run curl hello world first.info, yes, it is working. It is showing the version of the first application, and we want to access the second version of the application via /v2. Yeah, so this is how you can use Ingress controller for multiple paths. So you have two services under one domain. If you want to access each and every service in a different path, you can define each and every service on a different path in Ingress file like this, and you can have multiple services servicing under one domain name. In the same way, you can define for multiple subdomains. If you have two subdomains, you need to define two hosts and the path will be then different like this. So I think you can try it yourself. It is very simple, just you follow the same thing, and if you follow my video from the beginning and whatever the theory I discussed in the beginning, if you follow that understands, then you can easily define Ingress controller for multiple subdomains. If you face any issue in that experiment, please let me know. Put them in the comment section. Definitely I will come back to you. If you really need, I can make a video on that as well. Before wrapping up the video, let us summarize what we have discussed so far. We have looked at what is Ingress and what is Ingress controller and what is the role of Ingress controller in Kubernetes cluster. And finally, we have seen the demo of how we can implement Ingress controller for an application. Hope you enjoyed this video and you have learned about Ingress and Ingress controller in Kubernetes. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, subscribe it and press the bell icon so that you don't miss my future updates. See you in the next video. Until then, bye-bye.